All right. Well, hello, neurodata refiners. We are Kym and Greg,
Welcome to this week's podcast.
and this week's podcast is Neurodata Refinement. It's the show on which we embark on the journey of being able to back up somebody's brain in one state and then restore it on another day. When people asked me what I was going to do with it, I said I am going to use it every morning. When I come into work, I'm going to restore my work brain, and then before I go home, I'm going to restore my home brain.
Well, how very severance of you.
Yes, and I'm thinking that that will be a perfect use of the technology in our lab.
Yeah.
But ideally, we'll be able to use it for patients who can back up their brains before they go to war and then restore them when they come back. With people who have seasonal depression, postpartum depression, they're worried about having that, or who have PMDD or monthly mood dips where we can predict when they're going to happen.
Yeah, and so I'm kind of the patient zero here. We're backing me up before my surgery, which is in 2 weeks, and then we're going to restore me after my surgery and see how that goes. And I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, we're really excited. The restoration equipment that we're going to be using
Arrived today
in a big box. We're getting trained on it Monday, and they've built it just for us. So today, we're going to continue what we did last week, where we backed up Kym's brain with a whole bunch of tasks. Last week, we introduced you to the psychophysiology that we measured: your heart rate variability, your skin conductance, your respiration rate. This week, we're going to talk about what we got out of your brain.
So before we go to the brain, I just wanted to
Please.
make a comment about last week as I was talking to people, especially about my resting state and how my smile muscles were increasing and resting. And somebody said to me, "Oh, it's the opposite of resting bitch face." And I didn't even think about that.
Yes.
But yeah, so I have resting happy face, not resting bitch face. And I think that's probably why so many people just come up to me and ask me random questions. I'm like, I don't work here. I don't know why I look friendly, but apparently so there's some scientific evidence that that's why.
Yes, you are exceedingly approachable in exactly that way. I can figure, unless I have surprised you or upset you, that probably you're going to have a pleasant countenance, as they say. So, right, and so we measured that, and we also measured your brain. We measured your brain using high-density electroencephalography, or EEG, and that was 64 electrodes placed around your head. It was a saltwater system.
Yeah, and I would just like to say the saltwater system is amazing, and it's so much nicer than the gel system.
Oh, heck yeah.
For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the old EEG systems, you had to basically dig into somebody's skull at the each electrode and put in this gel. And it took, especially with someone like my hair, it would take 45 minutes to an hour to cap me. And then the first gel electrodes that they had done would have dried out and they had to start again. And it was just a really long and tedious process. And this was just so fast and so easy and not painful.
Yes, we bought this system under the premise that it was going to be 10 to 15 minutes of setup, and ideally closer to 5 to 10. And that's kind of what it was.
Yeah.
And we can talk during the time, and it's not painful for just about anybody. And the nice thing is it works on any kind of hair. So if you have natural hair, if you have a big fuzzy afro or locks or something, it's all going to still be workable. So what we got out of it are brainwaves. Now, brainwaves, each time a neuron fires, it releases a little bit of electricity. If a whole bunch of neurons are firing at the same time, they release electricity that's detectable at the level of the scalp, so I could put an electrode on at the level of the scalp. Now, firing just once doesn't mean very much. But if they fire rhythmically, those rhythms end up meaning different things. So we can look at what's going on in the rhythmic firing of these electrodes, or of these neurons, rather. The slower the firing, the more toward trancy it is. So delta waves are 0 point something to about 4 times a second, 3 to 4 times a second, and they happen mostly while you're sleeping. In the range of 4 to 7 times a second oscillations, that's theta. It's associated with trance, it's associated with deep meditation, it's associated with memory. So if you're lost in thought and memory, that's going to be a lot of theta waves. from about 10 to 12 times a second oscillations, or 8 to 12 times a second oscillations, that's alpha. And that's the brain's idling state. When it's not doing a whole lot, you have alpha. When you're relaxed and you're just sort of staring off into the distance, that's alpha. Getting faster, 15 to 25 times a second oscillations is beta. And that's associated with paying attention, being cognitively alert, knowing what you're perceiving. Once we get up above that, somewhere around 40 times a second, 35 to 45 or even higher times a second oscillations, that's really associated with cognitive work, like working memory. It's associated with arousal, being excited about something. And it's associated with putting things together. So if I see your face and I get, oh, there are two eyes, there's a nose, that's a mouth, that must be a face. That feature binding, putting things together, that's a gamma process in that 35 to 45 times a second range. So what we're going to do is look at what your brain did in all these frequency bands as you did some things that you wanted to try and restore later. And when we're done, we're going to come back and say, let's get you back to a whole head that looked like what it did on alpha, beta, and gamma, and theta. We should say that these aren't exclusive. So, for example, extreme athletes I've found often have lots of theta and gamma at the same time in the front of their head, which is associated with both being trancy and all leaned in and working hard at something. And my coach says that's pain processing. When she is having to work hard to stay balanced in the air in a painful place, then she's leaned in, a little bit trancy, but fully present. I've also found that in expert meditators. And when we train people to meditate, they get that gamma theta kind of profile.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So we'll see what happened for you. Again, we have your data that was processed. And so what we can see, I've got a single electrode here in the front of the head, and you can actually see what went on there. And you see there's a big band here around 25 hertz that's very active. Yellow is very active. And this is in the task where you rested, and then you talked about your journal, and then you thought quietly about your journal.
Okay.
And so beta, for you, is your predominant thing that's going on here in the front of the head. You were pretty attentive and working the whole time. As you were talking about your journal right here, you can see there's a lot more going on in these higher frequency bands. It started right when you started talking about your journal and stopped probably 20 seconds after you stopped talking about your journal. It's this real active, engaged picture.
That makes a lot of sense. I really felt engaged while I was talking about my memories, and I do feel like I was more engaged when I was talking than when I was just thinking.
Yeah, and that's what you said last time, and that's what we're going to see every single time. So when I look here at these different frequency bands, when we look at gamma here in the front of the head, and I've just averaged that out, you get journal out loud, high gamma.
Yeah.
Nothing else had very high gamma. It was also high theta comparatively. So it's that gamma theta process where when you're talking about your journal, you are leaned in, you are fully present, and that is, I believe, your flow, your happy state that we would want to get back to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we see is also for journal out loud, some alpha, and then sitting quietly is really where we saw a lot of beta. And we saw that on the last slide too, where you sitting quietly is not a passive process saying, Kym, be in resting state. You are probably not resting. You're probably thinking about all the things.
Yeah, and what is resting state?
Yeah, and for you, resting state is quite active.
I agree with that 100%.
The one place where we did not see that beta so much is when we said, think quietly about your journal. That really was for you, if anything, nothing was particularly high in think quietly about your journal. But we can do better than just that. We can get whole brain pictures of what's active and where. So for sit quietly, we see a lot of yellow for beta, in the back of the head, not as much in the front. So this is usually associated with perception. This is usually associated with, you're looking around, you're remembering specific events, but it's not like you're actually saying, oh, what do I do now? What do I do with my hands? And getting nervous about that. We did see more alpha in the front of the head, which is associated usually with rest.
Yeah.
Journal out loud.
Woo.
You can see everything just lit up. The whole head became yellow in that way. Some of this is jaw motion. We may have to do a little bit of innovation around the jaw motion. One thing we were thinking is we had you sitting in a headrest, moving your jaw, which might move your head a little bit. I might instead sort of just tape people's head to the headrest so their jaw can move freely, but their head stays very still.
That's an interesting idea.
It's interesting. It's intensely claustrophobic.
Good thing I'm not claustrophobic.
Yeah. But we could try it and see how well people tolerate it.
Yeah, I would be willing to try that.
Yeah. So, again, though, we saw this predominance of gamma in that state, these high frequency bands, and really a lack of alpha. When you're thinking out or talking out loud about your journal, it's anything but idling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Think quietly was actually, again, not so much going on for you compared to these other states. It was a little bit of right alpha compared to left, which usually people like Richie Davidson say are associated with being happier.
Yeah, with approach motivation.
Yeah, approach motivation, lower alpha on the left.
Yeah.
So it's approach motivation, and
which makes sense.
We'll
yeah.
take that. So, and then here, when we look at the different frequency bands, you can see you have lots of these frequency bands all sort of overlaid for all the conditions except talk out loud, where gamma really separates from everything else.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I really think that talking out loud is really going to be the key here.
I think that for you, talking out loud was the key. The one other person we measured, I asked her about it, and she said that for her, it wasn't exactly that way.
And I wonder if it's personality variables, because I love to talk to people. I'm very social, and so it might be that having a conversation even with just an empty room is better for me. For
you, exactly. And I think that does speak to why we used multiple tasks and probably the necessity of using multiple tasks for this.
Yeah.
We then had another thing that we did where we used lots and lots of different tasks. And we just assessed all the different kinds of cognition, and you thought about belonging, and you thought about being rejected, and you ruminated on something negative, and you savored something positive. And there you can see again that for you it's this beta that is predominant through the whole time. You're just really attentive and all in. This is not a sleepy process for you. And I can show that to those looking ahead in the audience. The yellow there is what we're seeing as a lot of activity, and then we can segment it up for the different tasks for what's going on in profiles. And what we see for you is that frontal gamma comes up for working memory, counting backwards.
Yep.
Which is exactly what we would expect. It's there for ruminating, and then it's also there for rejection. So for you, gamma is often associated with conflict processing and working through things. My bet is you didn't just spiral when you ruminated, but you probably challenged it a little bit.
Yeah. No, when I was ruminating, I always try and do some sort of cognitive control or reappraisal, or something to make it not affect me that much.
Exactly, and that's what we saw, that for you, that rumination is actually a cognitive control state. I'm wondering, after your operation, whether it will still be that way. What we find a lot of times in depressed people is it is not so much a control thing after the rumination runs away a little bit. Theta, on the other hand, was high for both savoring and rejection and ruminating, or actually not so much. It went down on ruminating. So it was high though for savoring. Alpha, was high for savoring. So that was kind of just idling, sitting there, enjoying it, relaxing.
Yeah, enjoying reliving the moment.
Yeah, and that was reliving a party and thinking about cats.
Yeah, rubbing my cat's belly.
My belief is that cats would be relaxing.
Yeah.
Yeah. As opposed to belonging, which is a more active process. And so what we saw with beta is that with rejection, it's down. You're actually less attentive, probably, in a rejection state, less attentive in a savoring state, but on the cognitive tasks, that beta was high. Like draw a stick
Draw
figure,
the stick figure,
or
that
something
makes
like
sense.
that. You're actually paying more attention. The leaning in theta was particularly high then for it looks like for ruminating. So that's a more going into your head state. From this, what I get, I think it would probably be useful to try and get you back to the savoring state, which is this sort of passive, relaxed enjoy, as well as talking about your journal, which is the more active, participatory, out loud kind of picture.
I think also with the ruminating and
Yeah.
kind of decreasing.
And the ruminating
Or
and
increasing that
sort of
activity.
control when you're ruminating, and see if we can get you to that control state that we're seeing here when you're ruminating.
Yeah, I really think it's interesting that we didn't just, because we talked about maybe just doing positive memories
Yeah.
initially, but I think how we're processing negative things when we're in a healthy state is equally important to get back to, and so I think that's equally informative and going to be just as important.
And what you could see is, remember I mentioned that gamma theta state of leaning in and yet having control for pain processing in my coach. When you were ruminating, it's that gamma theta state. Alpha and beta not so much present, but a lot of gamma around especially back of the head, which is often associated with arousal, and a lot of this theta more in the front of the head. And that's a leaned in state that we see a lot in our meditators, specifically. For the savoring state, that's more frontal gamma. That is, said I'm thinking about a thing, I'm actively working to be happy, which makes sense given your research.
Yeah, so my research is on enhancing neural responses to positive memories. It's trying to get the brain, certain brain regions, more active while you were engaging in positive memory recall and savoring.
And so savoring, in that sense, is a cognitive process. It's a frontal process where I would be working to boost up positive emotion. And that is what we see. When we ask you to savor, you've done this probably how many times in a brain scanner?
Oh, like dozens?
Dozens at least. So you know that task. You know exactly
Yes.
what the instructions are and what to do. And you're working to boost activity in brain regions that do emotions. And that's what comes out is that gamma picture. Belonging, not so much. That's a very different picture. Not so much gamma, it is, or that is actually parietal gamma as well, not so much theta though. And then rejection, we are seeing that frontal gamma as for cognitive control.
Yep.
So, and then the alpha is this sort of idling state, and often rejection does throw people into a little bit of an idling
So
state.
also, just eyeballing that, it also looks like it's left lateralized, which would be withdrawal behavior.
It would be withdrawal, exactly. Like, get me away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can try and get you back to some of the positive states. I think, as you say, your negative states are a little bit adaptive. Your rejection, you withdraw from that. Rumination, you challenge that. And see if we can do that after the operation.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I had for you with your EEG. I had one more thing to show you if you're up for it while we have just a little bit of time. And that is, I wanted to give a sense for what we're doing for restoration. And our first restorative process is actually going to be restoring your heart rate variability, the randomness between your heartbeats. And we saw that went way up for when you were journaling, when talking about your journal. And if you can't do that on your own, it's It's a question of how can we do that? We looked around in the lab for a long time to say, what is it that we would do to raise heart rate variability? And what we found was that if you want to put a kid to sleep, best thing to do for them, drive them around the block. Put them on a washing machine. It's vibration that restores that ability to lean in and relax. It restores heart rate variability. There have been a few publications that have looked at that. So we actually went to athletes and we did a big athletic challenge with them. We put them on an exercise bike, had them pedal, pedal, pedal until they were really stressed. And then we put vibration on their chest, or we didn't, and saw could we restore their heart rate variability. And turns out if you put vibration on somebody's chest, that's about the frequency that a cat purrs on your chest, then heart rate variability is restored.
That makes a lot of sense. And there has been research out there that shows that people who own cats do have better physiological activity.
Absolutely. And the first version of this work that we did, we called it Purr, because it was like a cat purring on your chest. Some postdocs in my lab actually went out and made a company. If you look up Apollo Neuroscience in the lab, you'll see what they've done with it, and they've done just a marvelous job marketing a product that does that. But I have a prototype here that you can actually see how it works, and we can tune these vibrations a little bit for you. I don't have a cat here, I have a frog. And what we can see here is this is now vibrating. You can hear it vibrate. It's not vibrating at a constant frequency, because if it was a constant frequency, your body forgets about it. So it slowly comes on and slowly comes off.
Okay.
Now, if you say, how stressed am I right now?
4. Yeah,
four.
not very.
Okay, how hard is it to ruminate if you wanted to?
Oh, I'm sure if I could ruminate if I wanted to.
Okay, try it just for a second.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Now I'd say I'm a 6.
Okay, good. Now put this right on your chest, right where your cat would sit.
Oh, that's nice.
It's really nice, right? Now try and ruminate. It's actually harder, right?
It's like my thoughts are fuzzier almost.
They're fuzzier.
Yeah, it is. It's harder to really focus on the things I was ruminating about before.
Yeah. And actually sitting and being relaxed and
Oh my
being
God.
present.
So I would just like to say, can I take this on my next plane ride?
Yes, we'll get you something like that. But now I want to tune it for you, because what we found is we had to tune it for people to be able to best modulate heart rate variability. So this is, we're starting up at 100 times a second. I'm going to go down to about 89. That's better. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay, let me get down to a cat purr.
Oh, I feel like I could fall asleep with that.
So this is now around 40 times a second, and all of a sudden,
I'm at a 1.
yeah. I'm going to go even lower to a low cat purr, more like a big cat, like a lion.
I think I like the other purr better.
Yeah. So a lot of people are up at a regular cat, house cat purr. And so that is your frequency. And when we go to restore your level of stress, your level of emotional regulation and reactivity, we're going to put that on at that frequency and see if we can get you back into this state.
That's cool. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, so you've seen our first restorative technology, which is what we call vibroacoustic stimulation, and that is it's vibration by way of a sound wave. I was playing a sound wave here. I have a little amplifier, and that came out. What's in here is just a wearable subwoofer that vibrates at a given at the frequencies of the sound I'm playing. So we'll use that in association with our other technologies when we get to our restore day after your operation.
I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you, Kym.
Yeah.
And thank you, refiners. We will see you next time, and you can see the data that we have shown Kym today, and I'll put a link to some of our vibration technologies out on the website, and you can get this wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in next time.